Africa, 46 BC. This battle did not rise from a local quarrel or a border dispute. It was the product of a civil war that had already shattered the Roman world. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he crossed more than a river. He crossed the line between legal command and open rebellion. The Senate's conservative faction, the Optimates, rallied around Pompey the Great. Rome split. Armies that had once marched for the Republic now marched against each other. At Pharsalus in 48 BC, Caesar defeated Pompey in one of the decisive battles of antiquity, but victory there did not end the war. Pompey fled to Egypt and was murdered. His cause did not die with him. It scattered, recoiled, and then gathered again across the sea. North Africa became the refuge and fortress of the defeated senatorial cause. There, in the rich lands around Utica and the old Carthaginian coast, the survivors built a new center of resistance. Metellus Scipio, proud, aristocratic, and stubborn, took command. Cato the Younger, the severe moral conscience of the Republican cause, lent the movement its political soul. Titus Labienus, once one of Caesar's best lieutenants in Gaul and now one of his fiercest enemies, brought experience, aggression, and intimate knowledge of how Caesar fought. King Juba I of Numidia added something else: local power, cavalry, elephants, and a personal hatred of Caesar's faction. What emerged in Africa was not a rabble of fugitives, it was a coalition. Roman nobles, Roman legions, Numidian cavalry, African infantry, war elephants. It was, in effect, the last serious field army the old order could still assemble. Caesar knew exactly what was at stake. If he left Africa unconquered, the war would continue. The Republican elite would retain a base, a treasury, allied kings, ports, grain, and the legitimacy that came from still standing in arms. Every delay invited fresh revolts elsewhere. Caesar's position, even after Pharsalus, was never as secure as later myth suggested. He had fought in Egypt, he had campaigned in the east. He had hurried back to Italy to restore order and calm mutinous veterans. His enemies still had Spain in play and Africa in revolt. To end the war, he had to follow the remnant of Pompey's cause into its new stronghold and crush it there. The African campaign was dangerous from the beginning. Caesar crossed from Sicily late in the year, in rough conditions, and landed with fewer troops than he wanted. His opponents nearly trapped him before his full strength could assemble. At Ruspina, earlier in the campaign, he had come close to disaster against mobile enemy forces and relentless skirmishing tactics. Labienus and the Numidian horse had shown exactly what Caesar was facing in Africa, not just Roman heavy infantry, but a style of war built on harassment, speed, encirclement, and psychological pressure. For weeks, maneuver, supply, and water mattered as much as swords. Caesar endured shortage, delay, and the constant threat of being drawn into battle at the enemy's convenience. Yet slowly, methodically, he stabilized the campaign, gathered reinforcements, and pushed his enemies toward a confrontation they no longer wished to risk lightly. Now the campaign contracted around Thapsus. Caesar moved against the coastal town and began to invest in it. The choice was sharp and intelligent. If he took Thapsus, he gained a strategic port and humiliated the Republican coalition by seizing a defended strongpoint under its nose. If Scipio tried to save the town, he would have to come down and fight. That was exactly what Caesar wanted. The sources suggest that lack of water had limited Caesar's freedom earlier in the campaign, but here he solved the problem in the Roman way. He moved fast, fortified key ground, and forced the enemy to react. Scipio, seeing the danger, marched to relieve the place. He could not watch Thapsus fall and still claim control of Africa. The men moving toward battle were very different commanders, and that difference mattered. Caesar, by 46 BC, was one of the most battle-tested generals in the Mediterranean world. He had spent years forging armies in Gaul. He had defeated larger forces. He understood tempo, morale, engineering, improvisation, and above all, the minds of his soldiers. They trusted him because he had led from the front and because, again and again, he had taken them through impossible situations and emerged victorious. Metellus Scipio was brave enough to stand in command, but he was not Caesar's equal in operational flexibility. He had numbers and allies, but he also had a coalition army and the burdens that came with it. Juba was fierce and formidable in his own sphere, but he was a king fighting beside Romans in a Roman civil war. Labienus was dangerous precisely because he understood Caesar's habits. Yet there is a difference between knowing a master and matching him. At Thapsus, that difference would widen into disaster. For Caesar, the stakes were domination or renewed uncertainty. Win here and Africa is broken. Lose here and the civil war reignites with full force. For Scipio and his allies, the stakes were survival of the Republican cause itself. They still believed Caesar could be beaten. They still believed the old nobility could recover power by arms. They still believed that one more great victory, one more deadlock, one more reversal could restore the balance shattered at Pharsalus. That belief marched beside them onto the field, so did fear. Many among them knew that if this army failed, there might not be another. The armies that faced each other were large by civil war standards, though the exact numbers remain uncertain. According to the sources, Caesar may have had roughly a dozen legions present, perhaps 50 to 70,000 men, in all once infantry, cavalry, and light troops are counted. Not all were equal. Some were battle-scarred veterans from the great campaigns, men who had marched through Gaul, Greece, and the East. Others were newer troops, less seasoned, less reliable under shock. Caesar's cavalry was not overwhelming in number, perhaps several thousand, but it was supported by archers, slingers, and light infantry. He knew he would need those missile troops against the elephants. Scipio's coalition may have been larger. Some accounts place his strength at around 70,000 or more, with a strong cavalry arm, substantial light infantry, Roman and allied legions, and, most memorably, around 60 war elephants supplied by Juba. Those elephants were not decorative. They were a battlefield weapon intended to rupture Roman formations, terrify inexperienced soldiers, and cover cavalry movements on the wings. Scipio's strength lay in breadth. More horses, more skirmishers, more exotic shock power. Caesar's strength lay in cohesion. His best units could absorb punishment, pivot fast, and turn a local success into a general collapse. The ground near Thapsus shaped the battle before it began, a lagoon of salt water, and the sea squeezed movement into a narrow band. Caesar had already taken care to fortify key points along this corridor, trying to deny Scipio easy access to the town. Scipio, frustrated in one approach, moved around and took up a position while still entrenching part of his camp. That detail matters. Roman armies were most secure behind earthworks. If Scipio could finish his position and force Caesar to attack a settled line under pressure from cavalry and elephants, he might exploit his numerical advantages. If Caesar struck while the enemy was still in transition, while troops were shifting, digging, deploying, and reacting, he could transform the field from a formal set piece into a confused collision. That is exactly the kind of battlefield in which veteran legions thrive. Caesar drew up with care. He placed trusted veteran legions on the wings, where the main danger from elephants would fall. The famous 10th stood on the right with the 7th. The 8th and 9th held the left. On each extreme wing, he positioned cohorts from the 5th Legion in a special role, effectively a reserve screen, to contain or blunt elephant attacks. Archers and slingers were pushed to the flanks, where they could throw directly into the advancing beasts. Cavalry and light troops were interwoven to meet the enemy horse. The formation reveals Caesar's reading of the battle. He was less worried about the enemy center than the combined threat of elephants and cavalry on open wings. Break those, and the larger line behind them could unravel. Scipio deployed with elephants on both flanks, Roman and allied infantry in the center, and strong cavalry support. It was an intimidating sight. The beasts themselves were part weapon, part theater. Huge shapes swaying under armor and tower gear, trumpeting above the line, they promised momentum, panic, and impact. For recruits, that mattered. For horses, it mattered even more. But elephants carried a built-in weakness. Once frightened or wounded, they could become missiles of chaos moving in the wrong direction. As dawn sharpened into morning, Caesar moved along his line on foot, speaking to the men. To veterans, he appealed to memory and pride. To newer troops, he offered imitation and glory. He knew this army was uneven. He had to fuse it before the first shock. Across the field, signs of disorder flickered in Scipio's ranks. Men moved in and out from the half-finished camp. Units shifted. Some accounts suggest agitation, hesitation, confusion. Caesar's officers urged attack. He hesitated, not out of fear, but from discipline. He preferred deliberate action, not a surge born from nerves. Yet, discipline was about to snap in his favor. Then the battle began without the clean command structure Roman theory imagined. According to the sources, a trumpeter on Caesar's right sounded the charge without formal order, perhaps under the pressure of the troops themselves. Once that sound rolled down the line, the army surged. Centurions tried to restrain men. They failed. Caesar saw at once that the moment could not be reversed. He gave the signal and drove forward into the fight. A controlled advance became an unleashed assault. The first decisive action came on Caesar's right. His archers and slingers opened against the elephants there with concentrated missile fire. Stones and lead bullets hissed and hammered into flesh. The beasts recoiled. Noise, pain, and shock did what steel alone often could not. The elephants panicked. Instead of smashing Caesar's line, they wheeled back into their own side, trampling supporting troops, tearing gaps, and collapsing the confidence of the cavalry beside them. The Moorish horse on that wing, deprived of their living shield and suddenly facing Roman pressure, broke. It happened fast, very fast. What had been designed as a hammer blow became a traffic jam of terror inside Scipio's own formation. Caesar's right took immediate advantage. Once the elephants and cavalry disintegrated, the legionaries pressed through and overran the enemy rampart. That was more than a local success. It exposed Scipio's flank and punctured the sense that his position was secure. Roman lines did not usually survive well once their camp front and wing protection were compromised together. The psychological effect was severe. Men still fighting in the center could hear the disorder before they fully understood it. They could see dust, flight, and confusion where strength had been expected. On Caesar's left, the fighting was no less violent. Here, too, elephants came on. Accounts differ in detail, but the core picture is clear. Caesar's anti-elephant preparations were held. The 5th Legion, posted for exactly this contingency, absorbed the charge with grim discipline. Missiles flew. Pila struck. At close range, men aimed for sensitive points, eyes, faces, trunks. One vivid story from the sources describes a veteran cutting at an elephant's trunk after it seized him, forcing the animal to drop him and retreat in pain. Whether every detail happened exactly as told is impossible to know. What matters is what the story preserves. This was brutal, intimate combat against huge, screaming animals at sword length. And Caesar's men did not fold. Once the elephants failed on both wings, Scipio's battle plan was gutted. His cavalry could no longer operate behind a secure shock screen. His infantry center was left exposed, its flanks increasingly uncertain. Caesar's army, by contrast, gained momentum with every minute. The veterans on the wings pressed inward. The center advanced with growing confidence. Light troops, now freed from immediate elephant danger, could harass and support where needed. In Roman battle, morale was not abstract. It was physical. Men felt when the line beside them was winning. They felt when the enemy next to them was wavering. Thapsus became one of those battles where collapse began at the edges and rushed inward. Scipio still had numbers, but numbers need shape. Under pressure, shape vanished. Some of his men fell back toward the camp they had occupied the day before, hoping to rally there. Others drifted toward the royal camp. Others simply fled. Caesar's cavalry, no longer checked effectively, maneuvered around and helped seize key positions. The retreat became segmented. One fallback point after another failed. Troops who expected safety behind entrenchments found them already lost or undefended. Every step backward deepened the panic. Once soldiers realized they were retreating not toward order, but toward emptiness, their will broke. Meanwhile, the garrison inside Thapsus tried to act. According to the sources, men came out from the town by the seaward side, perhaps attempting to aid the field army, perhaps trying to escape before the noose tightened. Even that movement failed. They were driven back under missile fire. The town could not save the army. The army could not save the town. Caesar's design had worked. By besieging one objective, he had forced the enemy into battle on ground, where relief itself became a trap. At this stage, fatigue and accumulated fear did what tactical defeat had begun. Republican troops, many of them still Romans, fighting Romans, sought someone to reform them, some standard to gather under, some commander to restore coherence. None appeared in time. Command in a collapsing coalition is fragile. Scipio could not be everywhere. Juba could not stop the Roman center from losing nerve. Labienus, dangerous in maneuver war. We could not reverse a full battlefield disintegration once the wings had failed and the camps were falling. Caesar's men had spent months under pressure in Africa. They had felt the sting of skirmish, the frustration of water shortage, the menace of enemy cavalry, the insult of a coalition that believed them vulnerable. Now, that pressure is released as violence. What followed was not a neat surrender. It was a slaughter. Large groups of Scipio's men, deprived of camps and hope, reportedly lowered their arms and tried to submit. Caesar, true to the image of clemency he liked to project, is said to have ordered mercy. His soldiers did not listen. Whether from rage, exhaustion, vengeance, or a deeper hardening produced by years of civil war, they massacred the defeated in enormous numbers. Perhaps 10,000 of Scipio's force died. The exact figure is uncertain, but the scale of the killing was unmistakable. This is one of the darkest features of Thapsus. Caesar won brilliantly, but he did not fully control the temper of victory. If the opening of the battle was decided by discipline and readiness, the end was decided by moral exhaustion. Civil war strips away the ordinary restraints of battle. These were not foreigners defeated on a frontier. These were Romans killing Romans after years of betrayal, propaganda, executions, mutiny, and revenge. The men doing the killing knew many of the names on the other side. Some had once served with them. That intimacy made mercy harder, not easier. The field belonged to Caesar. According to the sources, his own losses were astonishingly low, perhaps only dozens killed outright, though any ancient figure that was clean should be treated with caution. Still, the imbalance was real. The battle had not been a grinding mutual destruction. It had become a one-sided collapse once the elephants failed and the line gave way. Caesar captured the enemy camps and many of the elephants, a visible trophy of the coalition's broken confidence. He returned to complete the pressure on Thapsus, but the real decision had already been made in the open ground outside it. The human wreckage continued after the battle. Metellus Scipio escaped the field, but not the war's judgment. He tried to get away by sea and, according to the later accounts, killed himself when interception made escape impossible. Juba, I fled with Marcus Petreius. Their end was as grim as the campaign itself. Unable to survive defeat and unwilling to be taken, they chose death, reportedly in a dual suicide arrangement that left both men dead. At Utica, when news of Thapsus arrived, Cato the Younger faced the world he most hated, victory under Caesar. He took his own life rather than accept pardon. Caesar, who liked to spare prominent enemies when it suited his politics, was denied the chance to display mercy over the one Republican whose moral reputation still rivaled his own power. Not every enemy perished. Labienus escaped. So did the sons of Pompey. That mattered because it meant the war was not absolutely finished. One more campaign still lay ahead in Spain. But after Thapsus, the Republican resistance had lost its African base, its prestige, several of its foremost leaders, and its strongest remaining coalition in the field. The battle was not the legal end of the Republic. Constitutions do not die in a single hour. But in military and psychological terms, it was one of the moments when the old order ceased to have a realistic path back to power. That is why Thapsus deserves to be called one of Caesar's masterpieces, not because it was his bloodiest victory or his most famous. It was a masterpiece because of how completely it fused strategy, timing, deployment, and battlefield reading. Caesar used siege pressure to force battle. He used terrain to narrow the enemy's advantages. He anticipated the elephant threat and arranged his line to break it. He recognized disorder in the opposing army and struck before it hardened into security. When initiative escaped formal control and the charge began early, he adapted at once rather than freezing under the breach of discipline. Then, once success appeared on the wings, he let Roman battlefield logic do its work. Puncture the flank, shatter morale, take the camps, and turn retreat into ruin. By evening, the bright coast of Thapsus had become a Roman graveyard of the Republic. The salt wind blew over abandoned shields, broken standards, dead horses, overturned gear, and the hulking bodies of elephants that had failed to decide the day. Caesar stood not merely as a victorious general, but as the one man in the Roman world whom no coalition had yet managed to stop for long. Africa was pacified. The senatorial cause was bleeding out. The road now led toward final victories, greater honors, dictatorship, reform, resentment, and eventually assassination. Thapsus did not create all of that, but it made it possible. In the end, this battle was more than a clash outside a North African port. It was a verdict on momentum in the civil war. Scipio and his allies had numbers, noble names, cavalry, elephants, and one last chance to reverse history. Caesar had fatigue in his ranks, fresh uncertainties at his back, and no guarantee of easy triumph. Yet when the moment came, one army reacted and the other unraveled. One commander shaped the field, the other answered it too late. And so, on the shores of Africa, in 46 BC, amid dust, surf, trumpet calls, and the panic of wounded elephants, the last great Republican army in the West was broken. The Republic itself still breathed, but after Thapsus it was breathing through a wound that would never close.